on my YouTube page the previous chapters. They're about an hour each. So the first three the preface and chapter 1 is about an hour. The second video is the last part of chapter 1 and chapter 2. And then you obviously were here just before when I did chapter 3. And I will be continuing chapter 4. I think this is steeped. Enough. So I'm just put that aside. So I'm drinking Rooibos tea. Rooibos is a Kenyan tree, I believe, where the bark and the leaves are used for tree. The leaves and the bark are boiled to make tea. So I don't think it's regular tea bush. This is Rooibos, which is a bush tea. It's got a very strong, robust flavor. This one's got added turmeric, nutmeg, cinnamon, and ginger to the Rooibos to give it a little bit of extra flavor. Oh, that is good. That is good. That is nice tea. All right. So, all right. Now, part 2. 6 ways to make people like you. Chapter 1. I'll redo that for the live. So we are reading part 2, 6 ways to make people like you, section 1. Do this and you'll be welcome anywhere. Why read this book to find out how to win friends? Why not study the technique of the greatest winner of friends the world has ever known? Who is he? You may meet him tomorrow coming down the street. When you get within 10 feet of him, he will begin to wag his tail. If you stop and pat him, he will almost jump out of his skin to show you how much he likes you. And you know that behind this show of affection on his part, there are no ulterior motives. He doesn't want to sell you any real estate. He doesn't want to marry you. Did you ever stop to think that a dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living? A hen has to lay eggs, a cow has to give milk, and a canary has to sing. But a dog makes his living by giving you nothing but love. When I was 5 years old, my father bought a little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. He was the light and joy of my childhood. Every afternoon about 4:30, he would sit in the front yard with his beautiful eyes staring steadfastly at the path. And as soon as he heard my voice or saw me swinging my dinner pail through the buckbrush, he was off like a shot, racing breathlessly up the hill to greet me with leaps and joys and barks of sheer ecstasy. Tippy was my constant companion for 5 years. Then, one tragic night I shall never forget, he was killed within 10 feet of my head, killed by lightning. Tippy's death was the tragedy of my boyhood. You never read a book on psychology. Tippy, you didn't need to. You knew my divine instinct that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in the other person than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Let me repeat that. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Yet I know, and you know, people who blundered through life trying to wigwag other people into becoming interested in them. Of course it doesn't work. People are interested in you. They're not interested in me. They're interested in themselves. Morning, noon, and after dinner. The New York Telephone Company made me a detailed study of telephone conversations to find out which word is the most frequently used. I would have guessed it. It is the personal pronoun, I. It was used 3,900 times in 500 telephone conversations. I. When you see a group photograph that you're in, whose picture do you look at first? If we merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, we will never have many true, sincere friends. Friends, real friends, are not made that way. Napoleon tried it, and in his last meeting with Josephine, he said, Josephine, I have never been as fortunate as any man was on this earth, and yet at this hour, you are the only person in the world of whom I can rely. And historians doubt whether or not he could rely even on her. Alfred Adler, the most famous Viennese psychologist, wrote a book entitled What Life Should Mean to You. In that book, he says, it is an individual who is not interested in his fellow man, who has the greatest difficulties in life, and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring. You may read scores of erudite tomes in psychology without coming across a statement more significant for you and me. Adler's statement is so rich with meaning that I am going to repeat it in italics. It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is among such individuals that all human failures spring. I once took a course in short story writing at New York University, and during that course, the editor of Leading Magazine talked to our class. He said he could not pick up any one of the dozens of stories that drifted across the desk every day, and after reading a few paragraphs, he could feel whether or not the author liked people. If the author doesn't like people, people won't like his stories, his or her stories. This hard-boiled editor stopped twice in the course of his talk on fiction writing and apologized for preaching a sermon. I am telling you, he said, the same things your preacher would tell you. But remember, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful writer of stories. If that is true of fiction writing, you can be sure it is true of dealing with people face to face. I spent an evening in the dressing room of Howard Thurston the last time he appeared on Broadway. Thurston was an acknowledged dean of magicians. For 40 years, he traveled all over the world, time and again, creating illusions, mystifying audiences, and making people gasp at his astonishment. More than 60 million people had paid admission to his show, and he made almost 2 million in profit. I asked Mr. Thurston to tell me the secret of his success. His schooling certainly had nothing to do with it, and he ran away from home as a small boy, became a hobo, rode in boxcars, slept in haystacks, begged his food from door to door, and learned to read by looking out for boxcars and signs along the railway. Did he have superior knowledge of magic? No. He told me hundreds of books had been written about legerdemain, and scores of people knew as much about it as he did. But he did two things. He had two things that others didn't have. First, he had the ability to put his personality across the footlights. He was a master showman. He knew human nature. Everything he did, every gesture, every intonation of his voice, every lifting of an eyebrow had carefully rehearsed in advance. His actions were timed to split seconds. But in addition, Thurston had genuine interest in people. He told me that many magicians would look at the audience and say to themselves, well, there is a bunch of suckers out there, a bunch of hicks. I'll fool them outright. But Thurston's method was totally different. He told me that every time he went on stage, he said to himself, I am grateful because of these people come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in every agreeable way. I am going to give them the very best I possibly can. He declared he never stepped in front of the footlights without first saying to himself over and over, I love my audience. I love my audience. Ridiculous? Absurd? You're privileged to think anything you like. I am merely passing it on to you without comment as a recipe used by one of the most famous magicians of all time. George Dyke of North Warren, Pennsylvania, was forced to retire from his service station business after 30 years. When a new highway was constructed over the side of his station, he wasn't long before idle days of his retirement began to bore him. So he started filling in his time trying to play music on his old fiddle. Soon he was traveling the area to listen to music and to talk with many accomplished fiddlers. In his humble and friendly way, he became genuinely interested in learning the background and interests of every musician he met. Although he was not a great fiddler himself, he made many friends in this pursuit. He attended competitions and soon became known to the country music fans in the eastern part of the United States as Uncle George, the fiddler scrapper from Kinzua County. When he heard Uncle George, he was 72 and enjoying every minute of his life. By having a sustained interest in other people, he created a new life for himself at the time when people most consider their productive years over. That, too, was one of the secrets of Theodore Roosevelt's astonishing popularity. Even his servants loved him. His valet, James E. Amos, wrote a book about him entitled Theodore Roosevelt, Hero to His Valet. In the book, Amos reiterates this illuminating incident. My wife one time asked the president about his bob white. She had never seen one and described it to her fully. Sometime later, the telephone at our cottage rang. Amos and his wife lived in a little cottage on Roosevelt Estate at Oyster Bay. My wife answered it, and it was Mr. Roosevelt himself. He had called her, he said, to tell her that there was a bob white outside her window and that if she would look outside, she might see it. Little things like that were so characteristic of him. Wherever he went by our cottage, even though we were out of sight, we would hear him call out, "Ooh, ooh, Annie," or "Ooh, James." There was just a friendly greeting as he went by. How could employees keep from liking a man like that? How could anyone keep from liking him? Roosevelt called at the White House one day when Mr. President and Mrs. Taft were away. When the President and Mrs. Taft were away, his honest liking for humble people was shown by the fact that he greeted all the old White House servants by name, even the scullery maids. When he saw Alice the kitchen maid, writes Archie Butt, he asked her if she still made cornbread. Alice told him that she sometimes made it for her servants, but no one ate it upstairs. They show bad taste, Roosevelt boomed, and I'll tell the president so when I see him. Alice brought out a piece for him on a plate, and when he went over to the office eating it, as he went and greeting gardeners and laborers as he passed, he addressed each person just as he had addressed them in the past. Ike Hoover, who had been head usher at the White House for 40 years, said with tears in his eyes, "It is only a happy day we had in nearly 2 years, and not one of us would exchange it for a $100 bill." The same concern for the seemingly unimportant people helped sales representative Edward M. Sykes Jr., one of Chatham, New Jersey, retain an account. Many years ago, he reported, "I called on customers of Johnson & Johnson in the Massachusetts area. One account was a drugstore in Hingham. Whenever I went to a store, I would always talk to the soda clerk and the sales clerk for a few minutes before talking to the owner to obtain his order. One day I went to the owner of the store and he told me to leave as he was not interested in buying J&J products anymore because he felt they were concentrating their additives on food and discount stores. Because he felt they were concentrating their activities on food and discount stores to the detriment of the small drugstore. I felt my tail between my legs and I drove around town for several hours. Finally, I decided to go back and try at least to explain the position to the owner of the store. When I returned, I walked in as usual, and as usual, said hello to the soda clerk and the sales clerk. When I walked up to the owner, he smiled at me and welcomed me back. He gave me double the usual order. I looked at him with surprise and asked him what happened since my visit only a few hours earlier. He pointed to the young man at the soda fountain and said that after I'd left, the boy had come over and said that I was one of the few salespeople that called on the store that even bothered to say hello to him and to others in the store. He told the owner that if any salesperson deserved his business, it was I. The owner agreed and remained a loyal customer. I never forgot to be genuinely interested in other people. is a most important quality for a salesperson to possess, for any person for that matter. I have discovered from personal experiences that I can win the attention and time and cooperation of even the most sought after people by becoming genuinely interested in them. Let me illustrate. After a short break, of course. uh, I think I'm getting quite into the reading, but my throat gets a bit hoarse as well. What do you think so far? Let me know in the comments down below. How do you think of my reading style? Ugh. Feeling like an old man reading to his grandchildren. All right. Now, where were we? Let me illustrate. Years ago, I conducted a course in fiction writing at Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences, and we wanted such distinguished and busy authors as Kathleen Norris, Fanny Hurst, Ida Tarbell, Albert Payson Terhune, and Rupert Hughes to come to Brooklyn and give us the benefit of their experiences. So we wrote to them saying we admired their work, and we were deeply interested in getting their advice and learning the secrets of their success. Each of these letters was signed by about 150 students. We said we realized that these authors were busy, too busy to prepare a lecture, so we enclosed a list of questions for them to answer about themselves and their methods of their work. They liked that. Who wouldn't like that? So they left their homes and traveled to Brooklyn to give us a helping hand. By using the same method, I persuaded Leslie M. Shaw, Secretary of the Treasury in Theodore Roosevelt's cabinet, George W. Wickersham, Attorney General in Taft's cabinet, William Jennings Bryan, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and many other prominent men to come to talk to the students of my courses in public speaking. All of us, we workers in a factory, clerks in an office, or even a king upon his throne, all of us, like people who admire us, take the German Kaiser. For example, at the close of World War I, he was probably the most savagely and universally despised man on this earth. Even his own nation turned against him when he fled over into Holland to save his neck. The hatred against him was so intense that millions of people would have loved to tear him limb from limb or burn him at the stake. In the midst of all the forest fire of fury, one little boy wrote the Kaiser a simple, sincere letter glowing with kindliness and admiration. A sincere letter glowing of kindliness and admiration. The little boy said that no matter what others thought, he would always love William as his emperor. The Kaiser was deeply touched by his letter and invited the little boy to come see him. The boy came, so did his mother, and the Kaiser married her. The little boy didn't need to read a book on how to win friends and influence people. He knew how instinctively. We want to make friends. We put ourselves out to do things for other people. Things that require time, energy, unselfishness, and thoughtfulness. When the Duke of Windsor was Prince of Wales, he was scheduled to tour South America. And before he started out on tour, he spent months studying Spanish so that he could make public talks in the language of the country. And the South Americans loved him for it. For years, I made it a point to find out the birthdays of my friends. How? Although I haven't the foggiest bit of faith in astrology, I began by asking the other party whether he believed the date of one's birth has anything to do with the character and disposition. I then asked him or her to tell me the month and day of her birth. If he or she said November 24th, for example, I kept repeating to myself, November 24th, November 24th. The minute my friend's back was turned, I wrote down the name and birthday and later would transfer it to my birthday book. At the beginning of each year, I had these birth dates scheduled in my calendar pad so that they came to my attention automatically. When the natal day arrived, there was my letter or telegram. What a hit it made. I was frequently the only person on earth who remembered. If we want to make friends, let's greet people by animation and enthusiasm. When somebody calls you on the telephone, use the same psychology. Say hello in tones that bespeak how pleased you are to have a person call. Many companies train their telephone operators to greet all callers in a tone of voice that radiates interest and enthusiasm. The caller feels the company is concerned about them. Let's remember that when we answer the telephone tomorrow. Showing a genuine interest in others not only wins friends for you, but may develop its customers' loyalty to your company. In addition of the publication of the National Bank of North America of New York, the following letter made by Madeline Rosedale, a depositor, was published. I would like you to know how much I appreciate your staff. Everyone is so courteous, polite, and helpful. What a pleasure it is, after waiting on a long line, to have the teller greet you pleasantly. Last year, my mother was hospitalized for 5 months. Frequently, I went to Marie Petruccello, a teller. She was concerned about my mother and inquired about her progress. Is there any doubt that Mrs. Rosedale will continue to use this bank? Charles R. Walters, one of the large banks in New York City, was assigned to prepare a confidential report on certain corporation. He knew of only one person who possessed the facts he needed so urgently. As Mr. Walters was ushered into the president's office, a young woman stuck her head through a door and told the president that she didn't have any stamps for him that day. I am collecting stamps for my 12-year-old son, the president explained to Mr. Walters. Mr. Walters stated his mission and began asking questions. The president was vague, general, nebulous, didn't want to talk, and apparently couldn't persuade him to talk. The interview was brief and barren. Frankly, I didn't know what to do. Mr. Walters said he related the story to the class. Then I remembered what his secretary had said to him. Stamps, 12-year-old son. And I also recalled that the foreign department of our bank collected stamps. Stamps taken from letters pouring in from every continent, washed by the 7 seas. The next afternoon, I called on this man and sent in word that I had some stamps for his boy. Was I ushered in with enthusiasm? Yes, sir. He couldn't have shaken my hand with more enthusiasm if he had been running for Congress. If he radiated smiles and goodwill, my George will love this one, he kept saying as he fondled the stamps. And look at this. This is a treasure. He spent half an hour talking stamps and looking at a picture of his boy. He then devoted more than an hour of his time giving me every bit of information I wanted without even suggesting that he do it. He told me all he knew, and he called in his subordinates and questioned them. He telephoned some of his associates. He loaded me down with facts, figures, reports, and correspondence. In the parlance of newspaper reporters, I had the scoop. Here is another illustration. C.M. Naffel, Jr. of Philadelphia had tried for years to sell fuel to a large chain store organization. But the chain store company continued to purchase his fuel from an out-of-town dealer and haul it right past the door of Naffel's office. Mr. Naffel made a speech one night before one of my classes, pouring out his hot wrath upon chain stores, branding them as curse upon the nation. And still he wondered why he couldn't sell them. I suggested that he try different tactics. To put it briefly, this is what happened. We staged a debate between 2 members of the course on whether the spread of the chain store is doing the country more harm than good. Naffel, at my suggestion, took the negative side and agreed to defend the chain stores. He then went straight to an executive of the chain store organization that he despised and said, I'm not here to try to sell fuel. I have come to ask you to do me a favor. He then told about his debate and said, I have come to you for help because I can't think of anyone else who would be more capable of giving me the facts I want. I'm anxious to win this debate, and I'll deeply appreciate whatever help you can give me. Here's the rest of the story in Mr. Naffel's own words. I asked this man for precisely 1 minute of his time. It was with that understanding that he consented to see me after I stated my case. He motioned me to a chair and talked to me for exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. He called in another executive who had written a book on chain stores. He wrote to the National Chainsaw Association and secured me a copy of a debate on the subject. He feels that the chainsaw is rendering a real service to humanity. He is proud of what he is doing for hundreds of communities. His eyes fairly glowed as he talked, and I must confess that he opened my eyes to things that I never even dreamed of. He changed my whole mental attitude. As I was leaving, he walked with me to the door, put his arm around my shoulder, wished me well in my debate, and asked me to stop in and see him again, and let him know how I made it out. The last words he said to me were, "Please see me again later in the spring. I would like to place an order with you for fuel." To me, it was almost a miracle. He was offering to buy fuel without my even suggesting it. I had made more headway in 2 hours by becoming genuinely interested in him and his problems than I could have made in 10 years of trying to get him interested in me and my product. You didn't discover a new truth, Mr. Naffel. For a long time ago, 100 years before Christ was born, a famous old Roman poet, Publius Cyrus, remarked, "We are interested in others when they are interested in us." A show of interest, as with every other principle of human relations, we must be sincere. It must pay off not only for the person showing interest, but for the person receiving the attention. It is a two-way street. Both parties benefit. Martin Ginsburg, who took our course in Long Island, New York, reported how the special interest the nurse took in him profoundly affected his life. It was Thanksgiving Day when I was 10 years old. I was in a welfare ward at the city hospital when I was scheduled to undergo a major orthopedic surgery the next day. I knew that I would only look forward to months for confinement, conveyance, and pain. My father was dead, and my mother and I lived alone in a small apartment, and we were on welfare. My mother was unable to visit me that day. As the day went on, I became overwhelmed with the feeling of loneliness, despair, and fear. I knew that my mother was home alone, worrying about me, not having anyone to be with, not having anyone to eat with, and not having enough money to afford a Thanksgiving Day dinner. The tears welled up in my eyes. I was stuck in my head under the pillow and pulled the covers over it. I cried silently, but oh so bitterly, as much of my body racked with pain. A young student nurse heard my sobbing and came over me. She took the covers off my face and started wiping my tears. She told me how lonely she was, having to work the next day and not being able to be with her family. She asked me whether I would have dinner with her. She brought 2 trays of food, sliced turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and ice cream for dessert. She talked to me and tried to calm my nerves, tried to calm my fears. Even though she was scheduled to go off duty at 4 p.m., she stayed on her own time until almost 11 p.m. She played games with me, talked to me, and stayed with me until I finally fell asleep. Many Thanksgivings have come and gone since I was 10, but one never passes without me remembering that particular one and my feelings of frustration, fear, loneliness, and warmth and tenderness of the stranger that somehow made it bearable. If you want others to like you, if you want to develop real friendships, if you want to help others at the same time as you help yourself, keep this principle in mind. Principle 1, become genuinely interested in other people. So that concludes section 1 of part 2. The principle we have learned is become genuinely interested in other people. And what would I say for this? I'd say this is pretty good. What can I add? Obviously, when people take an interest to you, you feel more open up, and you feel more opened up and available to talk about all manner of things. such things as like building a rapport with others, that is a genuine means of genuine mutual mode of communication, then you are able to accomplish a lot more. Because if you're always speaking from a point of authority all the time, the other person will just say, right, that person is just authority. I'm just going to listen, pay lip service, blah, 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 do what I have to do and go. You're not going to get any more out of that person. They're not going to stay with you in the rain. Maybe out of kindness, they might have an umbrella if they're there. But for the most part, they're not going to give a toss about you. If you express interest in the other person, their means, their modes, their inner beliefs, their trials and tribulations they've gone through life, how they hold themselves and how they dream and what they all are meant to accomplish, you will get a lot more out of that person. I don't know if anyone else has been following along in the discussion. On the YouTube stream, in the last chapter, I did receive a few comments, but this is the conclusion. I have read for about almost 3 hours now, or 2.5 to 3 hours. I think I'm going to have to take a break for the day. If I read any more, I might damage my voice. And I want to save some for later on. I'll be taking a long break now. I'll probably have to end the live. But yeah, thank you for everyone that has joined in. Thank you for everyone on YouTube. Thank you for everyone on TikTok. Thank you everyone on Facebook. That will be the conclusion for now. Obviously, if I go live again, you'll know what I'll be doing. I'll be reading through the rest of this book and making some content for you. All right.